The world was told it was over. The world was told that the sheer crushing weight of the Russian war machine would eventually grind Ukrainian resistance into dust. The narrative was set, and the Kremlin was preparing to declare the long-awaited collapse of the Ukrainian front lines. But the world, and most importantly Vladimir Putin, could not have been more wrong. What has unfolded over the last 30 days is not just a shift in the wind. It is an absolute staggering reversal of fortune that has shattered Russian momentum, humiliated Moscow on the global stage, and proven that Ukraine is not just surviving, it is systematically destroying the Russian military from the inside out. In just 1 month, Ukraine has scored victory after victory, making massive territorial gains, retaking what is rightfully theirs, and crushing the Russian forces with a level of tactical brilliance that military academies will be studying for decades. None of this is happening by accident. It is the result of a meticulously crafted, utterly lethal strategy that combines cutting-edge technological innovation with cold, calculated battlefield geometry. Let us be absolutely clear about what is happening on the ground right now. Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Oleksandr Syrsky has fundamentally rewritten the playbook of modern warfare. When Russia launched its highly publicized Grand Spring Offensive, the plan was simple. Putin intended to use his only remaining advantage, throwing hundreds of thousands of human lives into the meat grinder. The Russian strategy was a brutal, archaic echo of the First World War, sending wave after wave of soldiers into the crosshairs to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses and turn occupied sectors into gray zones. Basic logic dictates that if you throw enough bodies at a wall, eventually the wall should break. But the wall did not break. Instead, it became a slaughterhouse for the Russian army. Ukraine did not just sit back and take the hits. They implemented what Commander Syrsky calls an active defense. This is not about cowering in trenches. Active defense is a highly aggressive, deeply strategic posture. It means treating the battlefield like a chessboard, absorbing the blow where the enemy is strong, and violently counterattacking where the enemy is weak. Because of this brilliant maneuvering, Ukraine broke the bad news to Putin in the most painful way possible. In a single month, Ukrainian troops recaptured nearly 50 square kilometers of heavily contested territory. And that is just the tip of the spear. This follows a sweeping counteroffensive in the south where Ukraine took back about 300 square kilometers. By the end of this incredibly violent period, Ukraine had reclaimed around 450 square kilometers from Russian hands. Now, if Ukraine were making these gains after months of Russian advances, it would be one thing, but that is not the case. The absolute catastrophe for the Kremlin is that Russia is losing ground precisely when they are supposed to be surging forward. Russia's so-called unstoppable spring offensive has slammed into a titanium wall. Russian forces were ordered to push toward Konstantinovka, Liman, Zaporizhia, and the fortress belt of cities in Donetsk. Putin threw everything he had at these lines, and the result? A massive, grinding halt. To understand just how badly Russia is failing, we have to look at the numbers. A year ago, Russia was inching forward at a rate of about 5 square miles a day. Today, despite pouring endless amounts of men and metal into the fight, their rate of advance has plummeted to a pathetic 1 square mile per day. They have been slowed by a factor of 5. Meanwhile, Ukraine has snatched the momentum, advancing at almost twice the daily rate of the Russian forces. The Institute for the Study of War recently handed down an assessment that serves as the final nail in the coffin for Putin's campaign. For the first time in 2.5 years, a month went by where Russia's net territorial gains amounted to absolute zero. Net zero. After spending billions of dollars and sacrificing thousands of lives, Russia achieved literally nothing. But the loss of territory is only a fraction of the nightmare Putin is waking up to. We need to talk about the human cost because what Ukraine is doing to the Russian military is mind-boggling. In the very same month that Ukraine retook large chunks of land, the Russian armed forces suffered a catastrophic record-breaking casualty rate. Over 35,300 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded in a single month. Stop and process that number. 35,000 casualties in 30 days. That represents a 29% increase over the previous month. It is a level of industrial-scale attrition that no modern military can sustain. Ukraine is bleeding the Russian army dry, and Putin cannot replace the men he is losing. Russia's recruitment rate is catastrophically failing to keep up with the slaughter on the front lines. The Kremlin set a desperate target to recruit over 400,000 soldiers by the end of the year. They are getting nowhere near that. Right now, Russia is barely scraping together an average of 1,100 recruits a day. At this rate, military analysts project Russia will face a massive shortfall of tens of thousands of soldiers against their targets. When you are losing 35,000 men a month, but you cannot even draft enough bodies to plug the holes, your front lines begin to rot. As Russia is forced to stretch its depleting forces thinner and thinner across a 1,200-kilometer front line, massive gaps are opening up, and Ukraine is ruthlessly exploiting every single one of those gaps. So how is a numerically smaller military pulling off this absolute masterclass against a supposed superpower? The answer is a revolution in military affairs. The answer is drones. But it is far more complex than just putting robots in the sky. Ukraine has transformed itself into a Silicon Valley of lethal innovation. Do you remember that horrific casualty figure? 35,000 dead or wounded Russians. According to battlefield reports, a staggering 96% of those casualties were inflicted by drones. Let that sink in. The Russian army is not being beaten by traditional gunfights. They are being dismantled, hunted, and eradicated by swarms of Ukrainian flying and ground robots. First-person view drones costing just a few $100s are screaming out of the sky to obliterate multi-million-dollar Russian tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry squads. The psychological terror this inflicts on the Russian soldier is unimaginable. There is nowhere to hide, and the skies are turning completely in Ukraine's favor. For a long time, Russia held a terrifying advantage with their long-range drone strikes, launching Iranian-designed Shaheds into Ukrainian cities to destroy infrastructure. But the tables have violently turned. In a massive historical first, Ukraine recently launched more long-range drones at Russia than Russia managed to launch at Ukraine. The numbers are staggering. Ukraine fired over 7,300 drones at the enemy, compared to Russia's 6,400. But Ukraine is not just throwing drones into the sky blindly. They have developed a new breed of interceptor drones. These incredibly cheap, highly advanced interceptors are taking out Russian Shahed drones for pennies on the dollar, giving Ukraine a near 90% interception rate. Russia is firing fewer drones, and the ones they do fire are being swatted out of the sky before they can reach their targets. But Ukraine is not just playing defense. They are taking the war straight into the heart of the Russian bear. Ukraine has initiated a relentless campaign of deep strikes, whittling away at the Russian war machine from the inside. In just a few weeks, Ukrainian drones struck 76 high-value targets deep inside Russian territory. We are not just talking about military bases. Ukraine precisely targeted and crippled 15 major facilities related to Russia's oil refining sector. This is a masterstroke of economic and military warfare. By blowing up oil refineries deep inside Russia, Ukraine is simultaneously snatching away the fuel that powers the Russian tanks on the front lines and torching the very profits that Putin uses to fund his illegal war. Putin is watching his economy burn from the inside, unable to stop the swarms of Ukrainian drones slipping past his vaunted, supposedly impenetrable air defenses. And speaking of those air defenses, Ukraine has been executing a brilliant long-term systematic dismantling of Russia's anti-aircraft umbrella. Over the course of 9 months, Ukraine carried out over 420 separate, highly coordinated strikes against Russian surface-to-air missile systems. They did not do this just for the sake of destruction. They did it to blind the enemy. By taking out the air defenses that once protected Russia's near-rear infrastructure, Ukraine ripped open massive safe aerial corridors. Now, Ukrainian forces are pouring mid-range strikes through those gaps. They are obliterating Russian ammunition depots, command centers, and troop gatherings in occupied territories before those troops ever even see the front line. Russia is being forced into a desperate position where they have to deploy units that have no ammunition, no command structure, and no air cover. Ukraine is literally setting the stage, destroying the logistics network so that the Russian army starves on the vine. This requires a level of coordination that the Russian military simply does not possess. Ukraine is fighting a 21st century war, while Russia is stuck in the 20th century. Ukraine has deployed a massive cloud-based battlefield management system known as Delta. This system allows Ukrainian commanders to review real-time, up-to-the-second data recorded by drones, satellites, and ground units simultaneously. They have total situational awareness. When a Russian unit moves, Ukraine knows about it instantly. They process the intelligence, calculate the artillery coordinates, and wipe the Russian unit off the map before the Russians even know they are being watched. This technological dominance is combined with a massive structural overhaul within the Ukrainian military. Under the guidance of Defense Minister Mikhail Fedorov, Ukraine is shifting to a highly efficient NATO-style corps system. This vastly improves coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and drone operators. And just when Putin thinks he has figured out Ukraine's tactics, Ukraine introduces a new nightmare. Reports are now emerging from the front lines of Ukraine taking the war underground. Ukraine has quietly invested heavily in building complex networks of tunnels right in the middle of the most lethal kill zones on Earth. These underground routes allow Ukrainian troops to move weapons, supplies, and personnel completely undetected by Russian surveillance. But they are not just for logistics. Ukrainian forces are using these tunnels to launch devastating point-blank ambushes on Russian infiltrators. The Russians advance over the rubble, thinking the sector is cleared, only for Ukrainian shock troops to emerge from beneath the earth, decimate the Russian squad, and vanish back into the shadows. Russia never sees it coming. Speed, stealth, and relentless innovation are the bedrock of the Ukrainian advantage. The Ukrainian military never stands still. They embed research and development teams directly with the combat units on the zero line. The moment a tactic becomes outdated, they pivot. The moment a new drone frequency is jammed, they write new code in the trenches and get the drones back in the air the next morning. Every single month, the Ukrainian High Command conducts brutal, honest assessments of their combat operations to figure out how they can kill more effectively, move faster, and strike harder. They are locked in a constant state of lethal evolution. Contrast this with the Russian command, paralyzed by fear, lying to their superiors, and stubbornly following the same suicidal attritional playbook they have been using since the invasion began. The Russian strategy is falling apart at the seams. So when military analysts report that Ukraine has retaken massive swaths of territory, we are not just talking about dirt and fields, we are talking about the complete operational breakdown of the Russian military. These Ukrainian gains are the direct result of a nation that has forged itself in the fires of survival to become one of the most capable, technologically advanced, and terrifyingly efficient fighting forces on the planet. Putin's unprovoked, brutal invasion was supposed to erase Ukraine from the map. Instead, his arrogance has birthed a military superpower right on his border. The bite back is happening right now, and it is ferocious. Ukraine holds the momentum. They are clawing back their homeland inch by bloody inch, and they are destroying a generation of Russian military power in the process. This spring was supposed to be the Kremlin's crowning achievement, the final push that would break the back of the West and force Kyiv into submission. Instead, it is looking more and more like the beginning of the end for the Russian Empire's ambitions. The Kremlin is beginning to panic. Even internal Russian sources are starting to leak warnings that the situation on the front lines is critical. As the losses mount to catastrophic levels, Vladimir Putin is becoming increasingly isolated, detached from the reality of the slaughter he has unleashed. He thought he could outlast the will of free people. He thought he could exhaust the patience of the free world. But he is not facing a traditional army anymore. He is facing an entire nation mobilized, digitized, and armed to the teeth, fighting not just for land, but for their very existence. The combination of Putin's delusion and Ukraine's relentless evolution is spelling the absolute collapse of the Russian war machine. The momentum has shifted, the bear is bleeding, and Ukraine is not going to stop until every last inch of their sovereign territory is liberated. The world is watching the Ukrainian military systematically dismantle the second strongest army in the world, proving that tyranny and numbers are no match for innovation, courage, and an unbreakable will to be free.